This is a complete chronological catalog of Soviet combat helicopters developed and fielded during the Cold War. Let's start. No.1. The Pioneer. The Me-1 entered Soviet military service in the early 1950s as the first mass-produced helicopter designed entirely within the USSR. It was used primarily for liaison, artillery spotting, and basic transport roles within Soviet ground forces aviation units. The helicopter supported early Cold War force expansion across Eastern Europe and internal military districts. It provided the Red Army with its first practical rotary wing reconnaissance capability. Operational experience with the Me-1 established Soviet doctrine for light helicopter employment. Powered by a single-piston engine with a three-blade main rotor. The airborne truck. The Me-4 was introduced in the mid-1950s to replace earlier light helicopters with a true medium-lift battlefield transport. It served extensively with Soviet Army aviation units and Warsaw Pact allies throughout the Cold War. The helicopter was deployed for troop transport, casualty evacuation, and logistical resupply across vast Soviet territory. It also saw export combat service in Asia and the Middle East during regional conflicts. The Me-4 marked the Soviet transition to large-scale helicopter-borne operations, capable of carrying up to 16 fully equipped troops. Ka-15. The Naval Scout. The Ka-15 entered service in the mid-1950s as the Soviet Navy's first operational shipborne helicopter. It was designed specifically for deployment aboard small surface combatants and coastal patrol vessels. The aircraft performed reconnaissance, anti-submarine patrol, and communication relay missions for Soviet naval task groups. Its compact size allowed routine operation from confined deck spaces. The Ka-15 established rotary wing aviation as a permanent component of Soviet naval doctrine. Featured a coaxial rotor system eliminating the need for a tail rotor. Me-6. The Heavy Lifter. The Me-6 became operational in the late 1950s as the world's first mass-produced heavy-lift helicopter. It was fielded to transport armored vehicles, missile components, and large troop formations for Soviet strategic mobility. The aircraft supported airborne and missile forces during exercises across the USSR and Allied territories. Its size allowed movement of equipment previously restricted to fixed-wing transport. The Me-6 redefined the scale of rotary wing logistics during the Cold War. Maximum payload exceeded 12 metric tons internally or externally. Me. The Backbone. The Me-8 entered Soviet service in the early 1960s and rapidly became the standard medium transport helicopter across all military districts. It was used for troop insertion, battlefield resupply, command transport, and medical evacuation by Soviet Army aviation units. The aircraft supported large-scale exercises and real-world deployments across Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Far East. It was exported extensively and saw combat service in numerous Cold War proxy conflicts involving Soviet-aligned forces. The Me-8 formed the logistical foundation of Soviet rotary wing operations for decades. Twin turboshaft engines providing redundancy and improved lift capacity. The Flying Crane. The Me-10 was introduced in the mid-1960s as a specialized heavy-lift helicopter derived from the Me-6 airframe. It was designed to transport oversized military cargo such as radar systems, missile launchers, and engineering equipment. Soviet strategic rocket forces and air defense units used the Me-10 to reposition critical assets in remote or undeveloped regions. The aircraft was optimized for external load operations rather than troop transport. Its service demonstrated the Soviet emphasis on vertical heavy logistics. High-mounted fuselage with extended landing gear for underslung cargo carriage. Ka-25. The Submarine Hunter. The Ka-25 entered service in the early 1960s as the primary anti-submarine warfare helicopter of the Soviet Navy. It operated from cruisers, destroyers, and specialized helicopter carriers across the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. The aircraft conducted patrol, detection, and engagement missions against NATO submarines during the height of Cold War naval tension. It was integrated into layered maritime defense systems alongside surface ships and fixed-wing patrol aircraft. The Ka-25 significantly expanded Soviet naval reach beyond coastal waters. Equipped with dipping sonar and anti-submarine torpedoes. Mi-2. The compact enforcer. The Mi-2 entered Soviet and Warsaw Pact service in the mid-1960s as a light utility helicopter with armed capability. It was widely assigned to reconnaissance, liaison, and light attack roles within frontline Army aviation units. Armed variants carried machine guns, rockets, or light anti-armor weapons for battlefield support. The helicopter was extensively produced in Poland and fielded across Eastern Europe. The Mi-2 demonstrated the Soviet shift toward arming even light rotary wing platforms. Twin turboshaft engines powering a lightweight airframe with external weapon mounts. Mi-8TV. The armed transport. The Mi-8TV was an armed development of the standard Mi-8 introduced during the late 1960s. It was equipped to provide direct fire support while conducting troop transport and assault landings. Soviet forces used the aircraft to escort transport helicopters and suppress ground targets during air assault operations. This variant saw combat use in multiple Cold War conflicts involving Soviet allies. The Mi-8TV formalized the concept of the multipurpose assault helicopter. Fitted with rocket pods and door-mounted machine guns. Mi-14. The Maritime Guardian. The Mi-14 entered service in the early 1970s as an amphibious anti-submarine helicopter for the Soviet Navy. It was developed from the Mi-8 platform but redesigned for extended maritime operations. The aircraft conducted patrols, submarine detection, and naval search missions in coastal and open ocean environments. Its amphibious capability allowed emergency water landings during long-range operations. The Mi-14 strengthened Soviet naval aviation during peak Cold War maritime competition. Boat-shaped hull enabling amphibious operations. Kamov Ka-26. The modular platform. The Ka-26 entered service in the late 1960s as a light utility helicopter designed around a modular mission system. It was used by military units for reconnaissance, logistics, and training roles. The helicopter could be rapidly reconfigured for cargo, personnel, or special-purpose missions. Its small size made it suitable for operations from confined or austere locations. The Ka-26 reflected Soviet experimentation with flexible helicopter design concepts. Interchangeable mission pods mounted beneath a coaxial rotor system. Mi-24A. The Armored Spear. The Mi-24A entered Soviet service in the early 1970s as the world's first true infantry fighting helicopter. It was designed to transport troops directly into combat while delivering heavy suppressive fire. Soviet Army aviation units employed the aircraft to support air assault tactics developed for large-scale mechanized warfare. Early operational use focused on combined arms integration rather than independent attack missions. The Mi-24A marked a decisive break from lightly armed transport helicopter doctrine. Integrated troop compartment with fixed forward-firing cannon armament. Mi-24D. The Battlefield Hammer. The Mi-24D entered service shortly after the Mi-24A with significant combat-driven improvements. It was deployed extensively during the Soviet-Afghan War by frontline helicopter regiments. The aircraft provided close air support, convoy escort, and armed insertion missions in high-threat environments. Its heavy armor allowed sustained operations under ground fire conditions. The Mi-24D became a defining symbol of Soviet rotary wing combat power during the Cold War. Equipped with a chin-mounted 12.7mm Yak-B machine gun turret. Mi-24V. The Missile Carrier. The Mi-24V was introduced in the late 1970s as an upgraded assault variant optimized for anti-armor warfare. It was fielded to counter NATO armored formations in Central Europe. The helicopter carried guided anti-tank missiles while retaining troop transport capability. Soviet doctrine assigned the Mi-24V to deep strike and breakthrough support roles. This variant represented the peak evolution of the Cold War-era Hind platform, capable of employing 9 M114 Sturm anti-tank guided missiles. Kamov Ka-27. The Fleet Sentinel. The Ka-27 entered Soviet Navy service in the late 1970s as a next-generation anti-submarine warfare helicopter. It replaced earlier naval platforms with improved sensors and endurance. The aircraft operated from major surface combatants and dedicated helicopter carriers. Its mission profile focused on submarine detection and maritime defense during Cold War naval standoffs. The Ka-27 became the backbone of Soviet naval rotary wing aviation entering the final Cold War decade. Advanced sonar and sensor suite integrated into a coaxial rotor airframe. Mi-17. The refined carrier. The Mi-17 entered service in the late 1970s as an improved development of the Mi-8 for operations in hotter and higher environments. It was fielded by Soviet Army aviation units operating in mountainous and austere regions. The helicopter supported air assault, logistics, and command missions during the later stages of the Cold War. Its improved performance addressed operational limitations identified in earlier conflicts. The Mi-17 represented evolutionary refinement rather than doctrinal change. More powerful turboshaft engines with revised transmission. Mi-28. The armored Predator. The Mi-28 was developed in the late Cold War period as a dedicated attack helicopter intended to replace the Mi-24 in frontline service. It was designed around lessons learned from high-intensity combat environments and modern air defense threats. The aircraft emphasized survivability, firepower, and crew protection rather than troop transport. Although not widely deployed before the Cold War ended, it reflected Soviet intent to field a purpose-built tank killer. The Mi-28 marked a fundamental shift toward Western-style attack helicopter doctrine. Dedicated tandem cockpit with heavy frontal armor and fixed cannon. Kamov Ka-50. The single-seat striker. The Ka-50 emerged in the late 1980s as one of the most unconventional combat helicopter designs of the Cold War. It was developed to maximize pilot efficiency through automation and advanced flight control systems. The aircraft was intended for independent anti-armor and battlefield strike missions. Its design eliminated the second crew member to reduce size and increase agility. The Ka-50 represented the most radical Soviet rotary wing concept of the Cold War era. Single-seat configuration with coaxial rotors and integrated ejection system. Mi-24P. The gunship enforcer. The Mi-24P entered Soviet service in the early 1980s as a firepower-focused evolution of the Mi-24 series. It was deployed with Army aviation units during the later stages of the Soviet-Afghan War. The aircraft emphasized direct fire support against fortified positions and ground targets. Its configuration reflected combat feedback demanding increased accuracy and lethality over flexible turret systems. The Mi-24P represented the final mature combat form of the Hind during the Cold War. Fixed side-mounted 30mm G30K autocannon optimized for strafing attacks. Kamov Ka-29. The naval assault ram. The Ka-29 entered service in the mid-1980s as a shipborne assault transport helicopter for the Soviet Navy. It was designed to deploy naval infantry during amphibious and littoral operations. The aircraft supported Soviet maritime doctrine focused on coastal seizure and ship-to-shore assault. It combined troop transport capability with heavy onboard firepower for landing zone suppression. The Ka-29 completed the Soviet concept of fully integrated naval rotary wing assault forces. Armored cockpit with capacity for 16 fully equipped naval infantry troops.